Welcome to the Grid Mod Pod, brought to you by AEIC. In this podcast, you'll hear from the utility industry's top operations leaders on how their companies are working to modernize and improve our ever-evolving power grid. Thanks for joining us.
Welcome back, Grid Mod Pod listeners. Today we have another exciting conversation about a particular topic that does not get enough attention, in my opinion. And so today we're joined by Mike Beehler, man of many opinions and a great moderator as himself, but he's also the national spokesman for PDI Squared, which I'll let him introduce himself in full detail. But Mike and I have been interacting through a few conferences in the industry, and I thought it'd be great to bring him on the podcast to talk about the future of undergrounding and really the modernization of our electric grid. I think we can go in, what did you just call it, rabbit holes, Mike? So let's get started. I'll throw it over to you, introduce yourself to the audience, and we'll jump into the questions.
Well, thank you for Elizabeth. It's a pleasure to be here. And it is an exciting time to be in this industry, to be sure. There's lots of things going on. I think underground is very exciting. With the Power Delivery Intelligence Initiative, that's PDI Squared. And I'm the national spokesperson. And I retired from Burns McDonnell about 6.5 years ago. One of the guys from PDI Squared said, "Mike, we know you're passionate about underground." I said, "Yes, I am." So happy to share that passion about underground with you today on any other topics that you'd like to talk about as well. It's been a pleasure to get acquainted with you in the industry, Elizabeth, and appreciate your leadership and the things that you do at AEIC and beyond.
Thanks. So I'm going to throw a softball at first, but, starting with the landscape and maybe, for those future listeners, where we are today, and help us understand where undergrounding projects are taking shape and really what's motivating those decisions.
Okay, so underground is happening all over the country. I just actually came back from a European river cruise and constantly was commenting to my wife at the lack of overhead distribution. We just didn't see overhead distribution in Europe as we see all over the streets of America. But a lot of utilities are realizing that they need to put their system underground. If they built a new neighborhood in the newer cities across America, Dallas and Phoenix and Orlando, the new neighborhoods are underground. But a lot of the old stuff is that it was built in the 50s and 60s and 70s. That's just overhead. And many utilities across America have decided that they're going to start to strategically put that underground. The leader in strategic undergrounding, obviously, is Dominion. Dominion's been doing it for about 10 years, actually. And they've got some great records now on exactly what does it cost to install an underground ladder, an overhead conversion into underground. And then what are the results of that? What are the operations and maintenance results of that? So we're starting to get empirical data back now that can actually tell us. We maintain at the Power Delivery Intelligence Initiative that you need to look at that planners and engineers need to look at the total cost of ownership of overhead versus underground, contending that over the life of the asset, the cost of underground is really lower than the cost of overhead. You don't have car hit poles, you don't have birds, you don't have mylar balloons, you don't have ice storms that bring down the entire system. You don't have hurricanes or derechos or tornadoes. You're not losing hundreds of thousands of customers in Houston or New Orleans because another storm has come in and taken down the overhead distribution system that it took down last month. They got put up the exact same way that it came down. So cities are learning that lesson. We're realizing that there is a cost if you lose the gross domestic product, the GDP of a local community for days at a time, or in the case of New Orleans, weeks at a time. And so there's a cost to that. If we as engineers today in 2025 start to evaluate the total cost of ownership over the life of the asset, we realize that underground is a great deal. And oh, by the way, other parts of the world have been undergrounding their systems for decades.
Right. So I don't know if it was just the state of Pennsylvania. Maybe it's national. You probably know this, and you kind of mentioned it. So any new URD, right, or a development plan, building plan, you're required now as the utility serving to underground those facilities. So like you said, a lot of our overhead facilities that we all ride around the streets and stare at and ponder, I know I do, We're
Right.
saying 50s, 60s, and it was probably what, the 70s, 80s when a lot of that started to go underground for the newer build, maybe in the 90s. So we do have quite a bit of overhead because it wasn't underground. And I guess another experience, and maybe I just want to share your perspective, because that total cost of ownership requires access and and then of the data to be able to quantify these layers of cost that you just rattled off, which, can be a growth opportunity for a utility, right? Having the data, collecting the data, piping the data, and then analyzing in a way that's, repeatable so that you can justify. Because from my experience, it was actually after every, 2 years of votes, there'd be a new member in town that, the customers would really want to know why their facilities are overhead, and they would like the utility to bring them underground. So the state rep or the community rep would come to the utility and request, for the services to be buried. And so this is just, small peanuts to compare to some of the projects you're probably going to share here. But a lot of the discussion, so I had to do that, I think, 4 times in my little realm. It was like, well, here's the upfront cost, and you would have to front that cost as the customer to facilitate the burying of the ground. So just the systems that we had to work within, there was always the cost. So you brought up cost, I'm bringing up cost. Like, what are utilities and or really stakeholders doing to, there's 2 layers here. I want you to dig in deep of that cost analysis you just spoke of. But then how do you manage the upfront cost versus the long-term savings? And where does that, kind of reside?
Okay, that's a great question. That's a long question, and
Right.
and I'll try to be direct with it. I think there's a lot of things that we can do as engineers to attempt to quantify the cost savings. What does it cost when, I don't have that outage, when a car doesn't hit the pole, when a bird doesn't, defecate on a string of insulators, when mylar balloons? That's really hard to quantify.
Mhm.
But I would suggest that it's easier to quantify when the city of Houston is out for the second time this summer, hundreds of thousands of people, that there's a cost to that. And that's probably more easily quantifiable, where people step up and say, okay, you know what? We need to do something different. They said that at Pacific Gas and Electric after they very sadly were convicted of burning down Paradise, California, killing many, many people. The leadership of that company was essentially terminated, and they brought in a new CEO who 3 years ago, this summer, 3 years ago, said, we're going to rebuild this company from the underground up. And we're going to spend 15 to $30 billion on just 10% of our T&D system. What 10%? They're going to go identify the most critical 10%, the most vulnerable 10%, if you will, and they're going to put it underground. And they're in the process of doing that now. They're finding it's a little bit more challenging than perhaps they thought. They were hoping the industry would step up with a whole bunch of creative and innovative ways to put underground, put cables underground. But I don't know that we've been able to do that necessarily. So they're still in a very, very proactive program at Pacific Gas and Electric. As a side note, Southern Cal Edison said, no, we're going to use covered conductor. We think covered conductor will solve our wildfire problem, which is essentially a resiliency problem, which we can talk about, until they had a big fire. And they made a huge announcement, and I think you're going to read about this in T&D World Magazine here very shortly. They made a huge announcement. It's like, we're not going to use covered conductor. We need to rebuild this area of Pacific Palisades in our service territory that got burned up in the Eaton fire. We need to rebuild that underground. That is a significant statement for a company to come along and say, no, no, we're an overhead company. We're using covered conductor. Now we're going to go underground. So at some point in time, utilities realize this is the way to go. This is the way to build a more resilient system. Whether you need to be resilient against wildfires or hurricanes or tornadoes or other high impact, low probability events, that massive wet snow, that huge ice storm that comes in and takes out hundreds of thousands of customers in the middle of January, the cold snap they had in Texas. These things are high impact, low probability, but they seem to be occurring with more and more frequency, and the cost is very, very high. Utilities are finally saying, maybe I need to rethink the way we design and build this distribution system in particular. It's not our grandfather's distribution system anymore. There are so many things that need to rely on the electric grid, especially as we build out for hyperscalers, especially as we build out for distributed energy resources, especially as we look at the load demands that are coming in the future with what, $10 trillion worth of onshoring or new investment in our country. What if that's just half right?
All
If
right.
that's just half right, that's a huge amount of growth. And it all requires what we do in the electric utility industry. So it's very exciting, obviously. So how are we going to build that? I'll contend we build that underground.
I'll say, fun fact, being the AEIC podcast, reading through the historical archives, one of the founding conversations and then the first set of guests that were invited into these meetings was insurance entities. So there's this whole space of insurance industry and, discussing with the folks that were designing and ultimately be creating the standards for safe wiring, how to test the equipment. But it's just like, we've always been kind of a part of this fire insurance mitigation, and 140 years later, like, it's at the tip of our tongue. I mean, it's causing a lot of utilities to think differently, even if they find themselves not in the realm of requiring a wildfire mitigation plan. I think I've heard it numerous times over the last year and a half being within the ASC realm is if you're not thinking about it, you should be thinking about it because it impacts all, that we serve. So you're kind of the point of you talking about resiliency. Like there's a resiliency dynamic to it. And so that's another thing we've talked about in one of these episodes is we haven't really created metrics to tie any monetary value of what we're willing to pay for that increased resiliency. But so I guess, you mentioned that California is actively, you know, putting lines underground. And just for our listeners, like the cost to do that's above and beyond throwing a pole up and throwing wires is, you have to dig, you got to trench, you got to put the conduit. There's a lot more assets that have to be procured and purchased and put together. And then you just have permitting and the labor crews to do it. So it is just, would you say on a scale, and I don't want to like scare in a way, but right, there's a scale of throwing some piles. So it's a really hard differentiation. I guess I won't put you on the spot, but you can if you want to. Of like what it takes to underground a facility versus throwing up a pole on, say, grass, right? I think it's like would you say? Like,
Right. Okay. So I will resist the urge to give you a number
yeah,
because
yeah,
I
we
don't
should
think
give
that's fair.
numbers, but let
I think
others
I
think.
think I think this next generation of planners and engineers and data scientists need to do the hard work. They do not need to rely on what the standards committee said was going to be the way we're going to do this 20 or 30 years ago, dominated by some strong personality on the standards committee. Just said, no, this is the way we're going to do it. I
That
just
is something real.
It is, Elizabeth, and I just don't, I'm essentially retired these days, and I can have opinions that I don't have patience for that. No, young engineers, the next generation of engineers, we need to do this right. And the right way to do it is to go underground. And it might be more expensive on the capital side, but we're looking again at the total cost of ownership. Why is Florida Power and Light spending $1 billion a year to underground their laterals? For the next 20 years, they're going to underground lateral lines. And why are they doing that? They're going to do that because they're going to be a more resilient utility. They're going to survive these Cat 4, Cat 5 hurricanes when they come, and they're going to have better service to their customers. And they're going to do it in a very prudent way that turns out to be very affordable. Why are these other utilities doing the same thing? Why can Anaheim and Colorado Springs and Fort Collins and Beaches Energy, which are municipal utilities, which are not investor owned, why can they make a decision to go underground? You look at Anaheim's underground program. They've been undergrounding for 35 or 40 years. They had a little bit of an adder, and you drive down the streetscapes of Anaheim. They're beautiful tree-lined streets. The reliability is high. The service is good. The customers are happy. That's a great combination. And then you drive through other cities, you go, why would somebody put that atrocity in the air for me to
And
look
then
at?
replace it with the same. Okay, so what I heard there was quite a bit. So just to summarize our, you know, even though we live in a society that follow the money, which, this is not a case to do so, right? Because we can build up stronger, I don't know, metrics is the right way, but stronger set of benefits that to any, positioning could outweigh that first capital upheaval. And that's really, you're able to reduce storm damage. And everyone has seen that through wind, ice, and falling trees, as well as wildfire mitigation. It lowers the frequency. So even I would say the duration, right? But some, another sticky point that a lot of those old timers in the utilities say is, well, it takes longer to identify where the outage is when it's underground. So I would say, I think we have data to say that's not so true, right? But anyway, I won't put you on the spot on that one either. But it's so
Well,
we have metrics that we all are driven by from a rate making perspective, Sadie, Safety, and Katie, that we can quantify financial benefits by the overall improvement. So that could be one of the big levers.
performance matrices that you just mentioned, system average duration, frequency, customer average duration. Those things are measured in minutes. And what we're talking about is outages. If we're talking about resiliency, we're talking about major outages that are measured in days at a time.
So that's the resiliency metric we need.
Yeah. Hey, one thing that City Public Service in San Antonio did is they said, we got to change. We have to change the way we do things. We're going to start taking all outages, whether they're days long or not. We're going to put them into our reliability matrices. Oh, you mean I don't get to take the big storms out of my reliability numbers? Oh, that could be challenging. That could be very, very, very painful for some utilities. Other utilities are very underground. Think about Con Ed, Consolidated Edison in New York. That is a major underground utility
From the
right?
beginning.
All that stuff in downtown New York City is underground, including their 138 kV system. Let me say one other thing just for the fun of it. Big cover story in T&D World Magazine back in June was what Eversource Energy is doing with an underground substation. An underground substation, 115 kV to whatever their distribution voltage is there. Multiple 115 kV circuits coming in underground to an underground substation that is 7 stories deep and then has 48 feeders going out. Now, you tell me that we can't figure out a way to do underground. The fact is we can do it. And by the way, Mike, okay, that substation is very expensive, but that substation would have never been built in the greater Cambridge, essentially downtown Boston area, if they couldn't have put a park on the top of it. It would have never been built. So sometimes you say, okay, well, I can build this asset, overhead if I can get a permit, but I'm not going to get a permit for overhead. Nobody wants this transmission line. Nobody wants this project in their backyard. So let's put it underground.
There's
And
the
that's a
power on the
factor as well.
customer, because I've heard a lot of projects where, customer stakeholders ultimately can mandate.
I just posted on LinkedIn about a project in my hometown of Tucson, Arizona, where the local utility, my former employer, is fighting the community over a very controversial 138 kV line. And they are spending millions of dollars fighting the community. They're expending goodwill in the community and aggravating a very formidable opponent that has formed their own little entity called Underground Arizona. And they're saying, Phoenix puts stuff underground. Why can't we put it underground in Tucson? And the answer to the question is because Tucson is really an overhead-centric company. And they say, we are an overhead company. And this group is saying, well, I don't want this overhead line in my backyard. And it's a fight. And I think utilities have got to say, at what cost of goodwill, at what cost of lawyers do we expend in fighting these things? Why don't we just say, okay, you're right, we're going to put it underground?
So, Mary, which one do we pick? Okay, so I heard a lot of entities that have successfully championed the need to do so. And so I think you rattled off like 8 cities that have been undergrounding. So, one great thing about the electric utility industry is we learn from each other in the various states and countries that we serve in. So moving past that initial upfront cost to underground, and really, if we as customers can reduce the minimal the maximum use of that chatter, which causes a lot of noise to detract from what could really be done. So we should stop saying it's too expensive, right? There's other benefits that you rattled off as well. There's the safety lever that you can quantify, right? There's the aesthetic and property value that like your hometown is now, fighting for. When you are advocating or being a national spokesman, is the goal to inform and educate? Because I feel like even the Grid Mod Pod and the realization for this and why I show up is I have found it fascinating working within a utility of like those that just do not know, and you don't know what you don't know. So the goal is to like bridge those gaps of knowledge and then foster it with the idea of giving them experience so that then they can change the status quo. So, I mean, that's probably like your goal, right? To be the spokesperson is really to educate like you're educating me and our listeners. So what are some other, strings that you like to pull to make sure the message is being heard on top of what we all just shared?
Okay, so I think you just mentioned them. I think safety improves. I think I'm huge on aesthetics. I lived in Hawaii. I worked at Hawaiian Electric Company for 2.5 years, and they were redesigning the Kalanianiole Highway. Beautiful highway, goes out to East Oahu. Beautiful highway, but they left the overhead distribution line full of communications, thick black cables hanging under. And you know what they did? They trimmed a tree into a V shape.
On my street,
And it
it has a bunch of V-strips. Right?
that
We've been here since 1900. And these
that is
trees
a
all
huge pet peeve. Is why would you do that and trim a tree? Okay, what's the cost of trimming that tree? Do you really evaluate the cost of trimming that tree all the time to maintain clearance? If you're in California, for example, you've got to by code you have to maintain certain clearances. But okay, so you're butchering it and you're taking away what could, in Hawaii of all places, be a beautiful tree-lined street. So I think aesthetics is a big deal, and I drive around here in Kansas City, I see the same thing. Could be driving around tree-lined streets, but I see a tree literally cut in half, half on the customer side, half just letting this antiquated 1950s and 60s design wood pole
1927,
straight out of the
right out front.
REA, not RUS, straight out of the REA manual, built right down the street. It's like, okay, why would we do that? So aesthetics is huge for me. Reliability is improved, but certainly resiliency, which again is measured in days, and the ability to withstand those big storms that do come through, ice storms, snowstorms, tornadoes, and such. With that, then comes, better customer service, better satisfaction. So I almost look at these things. If you're doing, let's say you're Florida Power and Light or you're Dominion and you're going through a big strategic undergrounding program, is that not a great way to interact with your customers and say,
Mhm.
hey, I live in this neighborhood too, and we're going to improve this neighborhood, and we're going to make it better. We're going to take this overhead electric and we're going to put it underground. It's going to look better. It's going to be safer. It's going to provide you better service. And we're out here in this community with you doing a good thing. I think that's a great card for a utility to play, personally.
Something we talk about on this podcast a lot is, there's this need to formulate a very strong source of trust between the external stakeholders, aka our regulators, our customer or our consumer advocates, as well as, the financial folk that, depending on the entity that is operating, could be owned in all different ways. And then the utility. So could you say, or from your experience, let's say a utility assesses their 400,000 pulled system, kind of what some of these other utilities had to do, gives it to some general manager of system planning and says, Dr. Cook, quantify the amount of effort. And, they go off, which that would be quite a lift of work with their 2 or 3 engineers that have no idea how to underground. We're talking internal, right? It starts somewhere. So, one thing they could do is find folk that advocate for undergrounding, find utilities that have effectively done it, bring in all the numbers, start to quantify, and say 9 months later, it's going to cost $500 billion, which some utilities are actively pursuing this. So I guess the piece of advice I'm looking for is that shouldn't stop, right? That number, that analysis, you need to know how much it's going to cost, because no one's going to give you the money or the permission to do things unless, right, that's upfront.
Right.
So is the next small step is really just what? I mean, it is gaining the alignment of the decision makers to say yes. I'm making it sound really easy. So I'm just like, where does it begin, Mike?
So okay, I would approach that
You're
differently,
good.
Dr. Cook. You're now the CEO of this 400,000 pole, 100,000 customer utility. And you come in and you don't ask your engineers to do this. You say, we are going to underground 10% of our system starting now. Go out and learn how to do it. I actually walk down to system operations and ask them what 10% of the system is, because I think the guys in system operations probably know where the best bang for your buck to get improved reliability and safety and everything that it adds. I think system ops already knows that, but then you can retain a consultant to figure out where you go after that. But you would challenge them to start to underground, and I think you will learn as you underground what is the better, faster, cheaper way to do it. Not to get a bunch of engineers that have never done it before to say, oh well, I think I better throw a safety factor in here because I've really never done this before. So I think I'll double the cost of pulling this cable. And I think we're going to have manholes every 700 feet. I could go 5,000 feet, but I'm just not sure if I can really get that kind of, lubrication into those conduits to really get that kind of,
But it all starts somewhere.
coefficient
Just
of friction.
to
What is
those,
the coefficient of friction? So you got to learn these things.
well, right. So I was going to say those folk eventually get selected. So that learning that those two people, I mean, most likely they will be hiring a consultant that has done it before. I mean, right. So there's a part of that. But, every entity in themselves has to create that resource of knowledge, be it augmented by professional consultants or those that have gone before.
Right.
But those won't always be there. So you have to then also embrace the reality that you're going to have to grow that talent within to then keep, as you said, do the 10%, go get it done. Then we learn from it. I mean, that is ultimately what I guess everyone
You
is
can grow it. You can hire it. You can hire it internally. You can hire it externally with consultants and such. But it's just like anything, Elizabeth. There's things moving in the industry. Artificial intelligence and robotics are coming to the industry. Are we all just going to sit back and wait for everybody else to figure it out and then respond? Underground is here
It's
in
here.
the industry.
You're
Are we all just
available.
going to sit back and wait and say, well, I'm just not ready because we don't have any staff. And my engineers tell me that it's just too expensive. Well, those are overhead engineers that are telling you that. And by the way, just go back and say, okay, I'm going to give you some training in underground. And we're going to start undergrounding a little bit because it's the right thing to do. We can't afford to continue to have these outages.
Which another shout out, workforce development. One of the most highly sought after talent right now is those cable engineers and those underground crews. So, for anyone looking for, where to point their next generation, even for the existing infrastructure, we need it, let alone to build out what we're talking about here. So we've brought up resiliency a bunch of times. So I feel I would like to give you the opportunity, how best do you think, because we actually held a workshop back in Chicago with 20 utilities, and we went around the room, and then you and I did it again when we were in DC talking about the definition of resiliency. But those utilities had differing definitions of resiliency, and we do have official documentation that gives you some general definition, but I would think that we haven't agreed on a firm definition that we could quantify and then qualify. And what I mean, each utility, I think, takes ownership of their own. And I'm just curious, what is your perspective of how we should measure this? And then, as you just said, take a 10% and just do. But what is it? What's your perspective of how do we build
Okay, so
resiliency?
I'll give you my definition of first, and I think throwing a definition out to the industry is a fair thing to do, even if you want to debate, some of the definitions. So my definition of resiliency is the ability to withstand a high impact but low probability event with little or no outage. Period. Elevator speech. That's it.
Done.
And then you say, Mike, little or no outage? You mean I need to withstand a Cat 4 or a Cat 5 hurricane or a major heavy wet snow with little or no outage? No, that's the goal of resiliency. Are you going to get there overnight? No, we built a system over 40 or 50 years. It's going to take a long time to convert this system to all underground, which I think inevitably is the way we should go for a lot of reasons. But do we have any way as an industry today to quantify that? I'm afraid to say that we don't. I think that'd be a great study for IEEE to do, but that could take years. In the meantime, we don't have years to wait. I think we can go to the FERC 1 reports that the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission report, FERC 1, Form 1, where utilities report on the cost of O&M on their overhead versus their underground, transmission and distribution, and the numbers are there.
Mhm.
The utilities say that their cost of underground O&M is less than their cost of overhead O&M. So there's a number reported by the very utilities right there that we could take a look at. Do we have a formula yet that we could plug in? No. But when we're talking about, fewer days that the governor's calling the CEO saying when is the system going to be back on, that's a metric.
Yeah. Zero.
Well, you want it to be zero.
Well, just a shout out for Alabama Power. They've created a tool where that was one of their first use cases, is calculating the reliability enhancement as well as the overall cost based on all of those metrics that we rattled off at the beginning of our conversation. And so every day, their system will automatically upload every 24 hours, take in the performance of the grid's outages and what was operated and who went out, and then also pulls in all the financial O&M of all of the systems. And then you can literally identify and prioritize which pieces of overhead would be more beneficial to underground based on it. So I've seen it myself, and it's really powerful. And a goal, and one of my goals of this podcast and also the Center for Operational Excellence, is bringing that framework of what was required to pull those various disparate databases into a data lake and then do the piping so that they can get that up and running. And so I think that's like when you talk about, are we all going to sit around and wait for AI to, who knows what it's going to do. There's a lot of really powerful packages and models that are being created as we speak. And so they've been able to quantify it. And that has helped them prioritize how they go out and underground or do not underground. And I guess just speaking with them, they learned so many little caveats that they would never have been able to interpret on their own. So
Right.
having that data
Right.
available.
And who's that again?
Alabama Power. And they've actually,
Alabama Power.
yeah, and they've
So
taken it to Southern Company. So now Georgia, Alabama, and Mississippi are all.
in a new Southern company, when Georgia Power's got a huge initiative going on to underground a lot, and they've got that is an overhead utility all the way.
Yeah.
I mean, every time I drive around Atlanta, it's like, did you really build that? You putting a span guy on a steel pole with steel bands, and it's just. But now they realize that they need to go underground. So that I would love for Alabama or Southern Company to share that tool with the industry. I'm sure they would. They are that kind of utility.
Yes, and that's why I shared. They've won awards for it. So thinking about a lot of things that you said, and something key about organization is, the joint advocacy. And that's kind of a part that you're taking in, is advocating for undergrounding. And I heard you share, like, every corner of the challenges, there has been utilities that have done it. For wildfire resilience, you mentioned PG&E, SCE, right? For storm hardening, you talked about Florida Power and Light. You talked about urban density and like just maintaining, really that was, but continue, Con Ed and ComEd. And then you even mentioned, what was it, Boston and Denver, right? So, regional diversity. So those are very dynamically different geographical spaces. They're all making that decision to bury their underground for probably a slew of their own cases. So that'd be a great, activity, is like bringing all that intel into, just a general awareness. And maybe we're doing it right now. So that, like, when you are that general manager being asked or told by your CEO to go underground 10% of the assets to go learn, there's a vast body of work already being done. So sharing the data, creating the common language, I think is key.
Yeah.
And then having people like you to like continue pushing the message out and helping to transform ideology.
So part of this, and I want to leave you with a provocative thought
Okay.
here as well.
A
But
thought or
think
a
about
question?
this. You go to let's say you go to a city and they say, oh, we can't underground because we're all rock. I'm thinking of Nashville right now.
Okay.
Beautiful city, love Nashville, but it's an overhead system. They do have a little bit of underground, but it's mostly overhead. As well, we just have too much rock. It's too expensive. And the question is, well, how do you put in the gas lines, the water lines, and the sewer lines? So we as engineers are figuring out how to do that. So when you talk about regional diversity, well, regional diversity to the electric utility industry is no different than the water and the wastewater and the gas industry. It's like the bottom line is we get it done. We dig a hole in the ground, we put a pipe in the ground. So one of the things that PDI squared is going to start a conversation about, and you'll see this ad in T&D World Magazine coming up in the next issue, hopefully right next to the article by Southern Cal Edison that's talking about how they're going to rebuild after the fires. Or you think about how are we going to rebuild Lahaina, or how should we rebuild Puerto Rico after Maria hit in 2017, and they're still suffering, is joint trenching all utilities in a single big joint trench. It's like you got electric on one side, you got gas on the other side, you got water, you got wastewater, and you got telecom on the top, and it's all in one big trench. You open it once, you fill it with the utilities, and you cover it, and nobody touches it for 5 years.
My daughter just asked me why that doesn't happen like 3 days ago. So she's 14. That I look forward
Well,
to
what did you
the progress
tell her,
being made.
Elizabeth? Why did you tell her? I mean, I think I know the answer to the question. What'd you tell your 14-year-old daughter?
Considering that the water, the sewage, the gas, and the electrical, as well as telecom, I don't think I said telecom, but they are included, are all operated and ran by a different set of leaders and incentives. Having experienced the internal challenges to just prioritize a single asset, an electrical company, it would take a great deal of, I don't know what the right word is, but almost authoritarian plan to demand that those 5 entities are required to do it. And that would take a much larger governing body. I had a great detailed conversation. But how would you? I mean, like, but, first step is write about it, talk about it, and maybe, start bringing all the groups together.
And she should have said, "Okay, Mom, go make that happen."
Yeah.
Mom,
I think she actually
don't
thinks
you
that's what I'm up to.
Well, one of the answers could have been, there are parts of Europe where they do that. And why not? If you have to go back in and rebuild all the Pacific Palisades, why not go in and do it once the right way? Or Lahaina. Why are we still struggling with Lahaina? Let's rebuild Lahaina. But we think at PDI Squared, Power Delivery Intelligence Initiative, we've seen some studies, or we think. We think that the capital cost of all the utilities that go in that trench can come down by 40%. You're opening up one trench. Now you're sharing the cost of that one trench with multiple utilities, and now your cost comes down. That could be intriguing if that's true.
Right.
Yes.
Like if you got all 5 parties to understand, yes.
Yeah, and remember, you open the trench, and electric's on this side, gas is on the other side, water, wastewater, telecom, they're all in there. Maybe a couple of spare conduits for who knows what might come up in the future. But now that's your utility access trench, and everybody knows it. And if you want electric, this is where you dig.
Right.
And so it's not that far off. It has been done in some European cities. There are some precedents that if we as the U.S. or North American engineering community would look beyond, our own borders and worldwide at some of this best-in-class technology, that we could actually do. And so you said, who makes it happen? You know who makes it happen, Elizabeth? The regulator. If I'm a regulator now, I say, why aren't you doing this?
Right.
If I'm the regulator, I tell these telecom companies, get off these poles. Oh, I'm sorry, it's a stranded investment. No, get off the pole or lose your franchise.
Yeah.
It's like, that's what you tell them. And so, Mike, you can't do that. Well, you're right.
Right.
But we can start the conversation.
Gathering, educating, and informing, and then hopefully,
Right.
So I always end the podcast knowing that a lot of our listeners are recent grads or those seeking to be a part of the solution in this energy transformation rate. So, any words of wisdom, or I think we gave them a bunch, but that you would give to those listeners about the career and everything you're
Yeah. So,
seeing?
okay, if you have picked or you're thinking about the electric utility industry, it is a very exciting, dynamic industry today more than ever before. Electricity is the foundation of the economy of this country slash world. When we build out artificial intelligence, fundamental to that is going to be safe, reliable, resilient electricity. We will not beat other countries around the world in artificial intelligence without electricity. We will not onshore 10 trillion, or is it 5 trillion? Who cares? Trillions of dollars of new investment in this country without electricity. We will not accommodate wind and rooftop solar and electric vehicle two-way charging and storage at your house without a really great dynamic grid. And we've got a grid that's old that needs to be replaced and probably replaced underground. So it is a great time to look at this industry. And so the words of wisdom is when you come into this industry, do not take just don't take carte blanche because somebody said, we're going to do it this way because we've always done it that way. That is the wrong answer. Young men and women in the industry, this next generation in the industry say, well, wait a second, that was built that way. You came up with that plan in the 60s and 70s and 80s. This is the new millennium. This is 2025. There's all sorts of new technology out there. In fact, there's new technology that's moving so fast that we need to do things just like positioning for new
Yeah.
technology. I mean, there's things that are going to happen with subsurface underground engineering that are going to give us a virtual model
Oh,
that I can walk in with a headset and look at what's underground because I built a virtual twin or building information model, if you will, if you're an architect, of everything that's underground
yeah.
slash overhead. And I'm talking everything: electric, water, gas, sewer, everything. So that technology is deliverable today. Are utilities using it? No. Should we be positioning for that and a lot of other things? Yes. So it's this next generation of engineers that are going to challenge the men and women that are on the last stages of their career, that are in their comfort zone, to get out of that comfort zone and to go do new and exciting things that are going to change this industry and make us competitive ultimately in the world marketplace.
Love it. So be curious about the whole system, not just your piece, and challenge the status quo, is what I heard. And then I think
That's good.
an
Yeah.
additive to the is though marry that technical expertise that you may be championing with people skills, because to get
Yes.
that mind to be changed requires a little bit of that. But I
Right.
fully agree. I love it.
Yeah.
Well,
Good.
thank you for showing up, talking about undergrounding, where we're going. And I love that last bit around how the models that are going to be built really can transform a lot of our unknowns. So, something to think about as
It's
we
an
move on.
exciting time, Elizabeth.
Yeah. Thank you. Until next time.
Thank you very much. Take care.
That's a wrap for this week's episode of the Grid Mod Pod. Thanks for tuning in. We hope today's conversation got you thinking about new and creative ways to improve our power grid. Be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel to be the first to hear new episodes. This podcast is brought to you by AEIC, the place where operations leaders come together to share knowledge and provide guidance to the electric utility industry. We'll be back with a new episode soon. Until then, keep powering on.